Was the tourist ready for the cold, unmoving eyes of the guard facing him? He thought it was just a glance, a look from a uniformed woman stationed outside the iron gates of the compound. But something in that silence made his hands tighten around the strap of his camera. Something told him she wasn't just a guard. She didn't blink, didn't shift. The way she held herself was unnatural for anyone who hadn't spent years training their body not to betray thought. The way her fingers rested, loose but ready, near the sling of her rifle was too precise to be casual. He tried to smile, she didn't answer. Her eyes never wavered. She looked at him as though she already knew who he was, as if she had memorized every nervous tick of strangers who walked past, as if she could see through his vacation shirt, past the cheap cologne, and into the restless beating of his heart. But he didn't know her story, not yet. Beneath the stillness, her mind wasn't quiet. The soldier, Captain Elira Vance, had learned long ago to let her eyes speak when her mouth could not. Orders told her to be still, to stand guard, to let tourists take pictures, pass through the gates, and believe they were looking at ceremony, not sacrifice. But her silence wasn't just protocol, it was survival. Because behind those gates, inside the compound, was something that tied her back to the one night she never spoke about. And the tourist, standing there with his shallow smile and restless eyes, had unknowingly pulled the first thread of memory loose. She remembered the snow. Not here, not now, but years ago. The blizzard on the border when her unit had been trapped between mountains and fire. The silence before the mortars hit. The way her best friend's voice cut off mid-sentence, drowned by a scream she could still hear when the night stretched too long. The tourist cleared his throat. Can I take a picture?" Her lips didn't move. Only her eyes shifted once, just enough for him to feel the answer without words. He lowered the camera. He didn't know why. He just did. And in that quiet, she thought about the things people never see. They see the uniform. They see the posture, the weapon, the duty. They never see the nights spent alone, writing letters to families of soldiers who never made it home. They never see the mornings when the mirror reflects a face she barely recognizes, lines cut deeper by choices no one else had to make. She had been asked once long ago if she ever regretted it, joining, serving, fighting. The question had stayed with her, but regret wasn't the word. It was something else, something heavier, something closer to guilt. She carried faces, names, promises broken by circumstances too big for her to stop. She carried the memory of a younger version of herself, hopeful, fierce, burning with belief that one person could protect everyone they loved. That version of her was long gone, buried under dust and snow, under fire and silence. Now there was only the eyes, the cold, unmoving eyes that others mistook for discipline. In truth, they were the walls she had built. "Do you ever get tired?" a voice asked once years ago. Her mother's voice, soft in memory, not accusing, just wondering. Yes, she had wanted to say, but she couldn't, because tired wasn't an option when you were the one holding the line. The tourist shuffled nervously, muttered something about moving along, and walked away. His footsteps faded. She remained, silent, still, but inside her mind kept moving. Because tonight, when her shift ended, she would walk not into rest but into another mission, a mission no one would know about. She had been called in quietly, without ceremony, for an assignment that carried no flag, no press release, no record. The kind where, if something went wrong, she would simply cease to exist. The kind she had been trained for. The kind that demanded silence even when her blood screamed for voice. But there was a problem, something she hadn't told them, not yet. The man they wanted her to intercept wasn't just a name on a file. He was tied to her past, to the night in the snow, to the screams that never left her. As the sun began to set over the compound, casting long shadows across the gates, she shifted her weight just slightly. Most wouldn't notice, but for her, it was the smallest rebellion against stillness. Because tonight the guard would no longer be just a guard. Tonight she would be the hunter. And yet beneath the steel and silence there was a tremor. Not fear, at least not in the way others understood it. More like the echo of humanity she couldn't quite kill. She wondered, would her eyes still look this cold when the mission was over? Or would they finally reveal the storm she had buried? Somewhere behind the compound walls a radio crackled. Voices murmured in code. The evening shift rotated. She gave the silent nod, the practiced movement that meant, I see, I understand, I remain. But inside she wasn't still. She was remembering the last time she faced him, the man she would soon be ordered to track. And she remembered the choice she had made then, the choice that had cost her everything. Her rifle was heavy but familiar. The uniform was stiff but grounding. The silence was suffocating but necessary. She stood as the world around her moved on: tourists, locals, commanders, civilians. None of them knew. None of them could. And maybe that was for the best. Because if they knew what she was about to do, what she was willing to sacrifice again, they would never look at her the same way. The tourist would tell his friends later about the guard with the cold, unmoving eyes. He would say she was intimidating, maybe even frightening. He would never guess she was carrying more ghosts than he could imagine. But tonight, those ghosts would walk with her again. And in the silence, she made a quiet promise. This time she wouldn't fail. This time the eyes wouldn't just watch, they would decide. Why did her hands tremble when no one was looking? The shift was over. The gate stood closed, metal groaning faintly as the locks slid into place. Tourists had gone. The courtyard emptied. Boots echoed against stone, fading one by one as other guards disappeared into barracks, into bunks, into their rituals of fatigue and sleep. But she didn't walk to rest. Captain Elira Vance walked deeper into shadow, past the outer hallways where portraits of generals watched with painted eyes, past the briefing rooms where the fluorescent lights hummed over empty chairs, past the places that smelled of coffee, sweat, and bureaucracy. She knew where to go. She had been summoned. The corridor narrowed, colder here. The walls weren't decorated. The silence was deliberate. She reached the last door, pressed her palm flat against the panel. The green light blinked once, then the lock released. Inside, no windows, no flags, no ceremony. Just a table, just a folder. And a man who looked like sleep was a stranger he hadn't met in years. He didn't greet her. He didn't need to. The folder slid across the table. The man's hand lingered for a second, long enough for her to notice the burn scar that ran across his knuckles. Everyone carried their marks. Everyone. She opened the folder. The photo stared back. Him. Her breath caught, but only on the inside. She had trained too long to let it show. Still, her chest tightened. The face was older now, harder, but she knew it. Knew it from the snow, from the smoke, from the night everything went wrong. The man across the table finally spoke. You recognize him? It wasn't a question. She closed the folder slowly. Yes. A pause stretched, not awkward, heavy. This is not a capture, the man said. His voice had gravel in it, each word weighed down. You know what it means. She nodded once. Her hand stayed flat against the folder, fingertips pressing harder than she realized. Outside, somewhere far beyond the walls, a storm was building. She felt it more than heard it. You leave tonight, the man continued. You'll have support but minimal, no trails, no noise. If it fails, it never existed. If it succeeds, his eyes flickered. Then you can stop standing watch for ghosts. Stop standing watch for ghosts. The words echoed, cruel or maybe merciful, she couldn't tell. She wanted to ask, why me? Why now? Why him? But she already knew the answer. They didn't choose her just for skill. They chose her because of history, because sometimes the only way to close a wound was to send the one who bled from it. She left the room without another word. The night air was sharp. The city hummed faintly, neon signs flickering, engines murmuring, lives unfolding beyond the compound walls. She inhaled, let the cold bite her lungs. It steadied her. She moved fast now, down alleys past checkpoints into the unmarked van waiting with its lights dimmed. Two men inside. She slid in without speaking. One nodded, the other checked the map without meeting her eyes. They knew better than to ask questions. The van rolled out. She stared at the blurred city lights through the tinted glass. For a moment she let herself feel it, the fear she kept buried. Not fear of dying, fear of facing him again. Fear of what it would mean if she failed twice. Her thoughts drifted back. The snow, the night, the mistake. They had been a team then, young, untested, too eager to prove themselves. She remembered his voice, low, confident, promising he'd cover her flank. She remembered believing him. She remembered the explosion that tore the night apart and the way his shape disappeared into fire. They had told her he was dead. She had carried that guilt for years, believed she had left him behind. But he hadn't died. He had changed sides. And now she was going to kill the man she once trusted with her life. The van jolted to a stop. A quiet neighborhood. Rows of buildings that looked asleep, windows dark, doors closed. The air smelled of rain. "This way," one of the men said softly. They moved as shadows, silent, purposeful. She carried only what she needed: compact rifle, sidearm, comms set, blade. Light enough to vanish if she had to. Heavy enough to end what needed ending. The building loomed ahead. Ordinary, unremarkable, the kind no one would glance at twice. Inside, whispers of movement. A light flickering under a door. The faint smell of cigarette smoke. Her chest tightened again. She knew his habits. Even after all these years, she remembered. He used to smoke when he couldn't sleep, leaning against the snow trucks, muttering jokes about frostbite and bad coffee. The past clung like frost on her skin. The signal came through her earpiece. Confirm position. Her whisper was steady, in position. Her hand hovered near the door handle, but she didn't push yet. Her heart hammered, steady and violent. Because there was something she hadn't told them. She hadn't told them about the letter. The letter she had found, buried in an old pack recovered from that night in the snow. His handwriting, his words. Words that hinted he hadn't betrayed them at all. That maybe he had been forced. That maybe he had been left behind not by choice but by chains. She never showed it, never spoke of it, buried it the way she buried everything else. And now, as she stood at the door, about to pull the trigger on the mission that would erase him, the question burned louder than the silence. What if she was about to kill the only man who knew the truth? Her hand clenched, her eyes closed for half a beat. Then a sound, a chair scraping inside, a voice, a low laugh, his laugh. She opened her eyes. And for the first time in years, the cold, unmoving eyes of the guard began to shake. What do you say when the ghost in front of you suddenly breathes? The door creaked as she pushed, just enough for her shadow to spill across the dimly lit room. The man inside froze, half a cigarette burning between his fingers. His head turned, slowly, too slowly for someone who didn't already know she was coming. Their eyes met. The years collapsed. Elira had imagined this moment 100 times in nightmares, in restless dawns, in the silence of guard shifts where her mind wandered where it shouldn't. She had imagined fury, relief, vengeance, closure. She hadn't imagined the silence. He looked older, yes. His beard unkempt, his eyes harder, deeper lines carved around his mouth. But beneath it all, he was still him. Still the man who once carried her through waist-deep snow when her leg gave out. Still the man who used to laugh when the radio cut out, making up songs in static. He whispered her name, not Captain, not Vance, just her name. Elira. Her breath caught like a wire pulled too tight. Her rifle rose automatically, instinctively. Years of drills, but her hands shook. Barely, but enough. "You're alive." His voice was rough like gravel ground against steel. "They told me," he trailed off, a smile breaking but broken, fragile. They told me you didn't make it. Every nerve in her body screamed to shoot. Every memory screamed not to. Don't. The word left her lips before she knew if she meant it for him or for herself. He raised his hand slowly, the cigarette still glowing between two fingers. If you're here, then they sent you, which means, his eyes narrowed, which means I don't have long. She steadied her rifle. Why? He tilted his head, a bitter smile. Because if you're the one at my door, it means they don't want a trial, they want silence. She didn't answer. Silence was safer. Silence had always been safer. But he knew her too well. You haven't pulled the trigger yet. His voice softened. That means you're still not sure what happened that night. Her chest clenched. The snow, the fire, the screams, the explosion that swallowed him whole. I read your letter. The words escaped before she could stop them. His face froze. The cigarette burned down to ash, falling against the wooden floor. I wondered, he said finally, if anyone found it. She kept her rifle trained, but the steel in her arms felt heavier than ever. You said you didn't betray us. You said you were taken. He nodded slowly. Dragged out of the wreckage, shackled before I could breathe again. By the time I realized what they wanted, what they would make me do, it was too late. And when I tried to fight, they reminded me who else they had. Her throat tightened. Who? He hesitated, long enough to feel like a lifetime. My brother, his voice cracked for the first time. They had him, Elira, and every time I resisted they made me watch. They knew I couldn't let them kill him. Her grip faltered, just for a second. The mission screamed inside her head. No trails, no noise, no survival. Eliminate the target. That was the order. That was the only way to close the file. But the boy she remembered, not the soldier but the brother, the human being who once shared rations with her when she had nothing left, he wasn't in her orders. The silence between them cracked under the weight of memory. You left me there. His words cut, not accusing but raw. You thought I died, but I didn't, and every day since I've wished I had. Her rifle trembled. The air tasted like iron. The comms crackled softly in her ear. Vance status. She didn't answer, couldn't. Vance confirm. She reached up, pressing the comms button with the back of her thumb. Stand by. Her voice was steady, though inside everything was breaking. His eyes widened at the words. You're stalling. That means you want to know the truth. Do I? She whispered. Yes, he said. Because if you didn't, you'd already have pulled the trigger. The storm outside broke, thunder shaking the walls. Rain hammered the roof, spilling down windows like tears. She lowered the rifle slightly, just slightly, enough to ask the question that had haunted her for years. Why didn't you try to come back? He closed his eyes. His chest rose and fell as if the weight of the world sat on his ribs. Because coming back would have put them on all of you, and I couldn't risk that. His eyes opened, wet with something she hadn't seen in him before. I thought keeping distance would protect you, but it only damned me. The comms crackled again, louder this time. Vance, report, we've got movement on the perimeter, confirm target status. Her hand squeezed the rifle grip until her knuckles went white. She could say it, just one word, neutralized, and the mission would be over, no more questions, no more ghosts. Or she could listen. And listening might cost her everything. He took a step forward, careful, slow, his voice was almost a plea. If you kill me now, Elira, you'll never know who really gave the order that night. The order that sent us into the snow. The order that left us there to die. Her pulse slammed in her ears. What are you saying? I'm saying, he whispered, the betrayal wasn't mine, it was theirs. Lightning split the sky, white light flooding the room for a heartbeat. And in that heartbeat, she saw him not as a target, not as a traitor, but as the same man who once shielded her with his own body against shrapnel. Her comms flared, urgent now. Vance, confirm, we're breaching if you don't respond. Her finger hovered on the trigger. Kill him or trust him. Silence pressed harder than the storm. And in that silence, she realized something terrifying. She wasn't afraid of killing him. She was afraid he was telling the truth. What happens when orders and truth collide in the same breath? The walls shook as boots thundered closer. The comms screamed in her ear, frantic, sharp. Vance, last warning, confirm target status or we move in. Her rifle was still raised, his eyes still locked on hers. Rain streaked down the window behind him, thunder rumbling like distant artillery. "Elira," he whispered, his voice cut through the storm, low and urgent. "If they breach, you won't have a choice. You'll have to pull the trigger just to prove your loyalty." Her finger pressed against the trigger guard. "Not yet, not yet." "Tell me," she demanded, her voice sharper than she meant it to be. "Who gave the order?" He swallowed hard. "I'll tell you, but not here, not with them listening." The comms crackled again, louder now. "Vance, stand down. Repeat, stand down. We're moving." She cursed under her breath. He saw it, the flicker in her eyes, the war inside her. "You know me. You know I'd never betray you. I'd never betray any of us. That order, it came from higher, from inside. That's why they want me gone. Not because of what I did, because of what I know." Boots slammed against the building steps. Metal rattled, breach charges being set. She had seconds. Her choices split like a forked road in her mind. One path finished the mission: kill him, walk out with her silence intact but her questions forever unanswered. The other path: spare him, betray the orders, and face the weight of the hunt that would follow her forever. Her breath slowed, time bent. She made her choice. In one motion she lowered the rifle, grabbed his arm and shoved him toward the back window. "Move." His eyes widened. "You. Don't talk, just go." He hesitated only a second before smashing the butt of his own weapon against the glass, shards scattering across the floor. The storm howled through the broken frame. "Vance," the comms barked. "Target location compromised. We're breaching now." She spun, fired 3 quick shots into the far wall, loud, sharp, echoing. Enough to sound like execution. Enough to buy a second of doubt. Then she yanked her comms earpiece free and crushed it under her boot. The door exploded inward, splinters, shouts, flashlights cutting through smoke. But by then, the window was empty. She was alone. Rifles swept the room. Shadows of men filled the doorway. Her own team. Soldiers she had trained with, sweated with, bled with. And now they looked at her with suspicion already burning in their eyes. "Status," one barked. She turned, face calm, rifle lowered. "Target neutralized." The word tasted like ash. The team leader scanned the room, flashlight beam cutting across the shattered glass, the spent shell casings, the faint smear of blood from his hand as he'd climbed through. "Where's the body?" She met his stare without flinching. Storm took it, fell through, window gave way. A long silence, thunder growled outside. The team leader's eyes narrowed. Suspicion lingered but not proof, not yet. He exhaled through his nose, clipped and sharp. "Sweep the area. If he's not dead, he's close." They pushed past her, boots pounding, flashlights slashing through the storm outside. She stood still in the middle of the room, her chest a hollow drum. Inside her ribs, her heart was louder than gunfire. Because she knew the truth. He was alive. And now, so was the question that had haunted her for years. Who had betrayed them that night in the snow? And if he was right, if the betrayal came from inside, then every man in this room could be a suspect. She walked out of the house into the rain. It soaked her uniform, plastered hair against her forehead, dripped into her eyes until the world blurred. The storm hid her trembling. The storm swallowed her shame. A hand clapped her shoulder, too heavy, too familiar. "You did good," the team leader said. His tone was flat, his eyes harder to read. "HQ will be pleased." She nodded once, the mask held. But deep inside, something cracked. That night in the dim safety of the barracks, she sat on her bunk staring at her weapon. The rain still tapped faintly on the tin roof. Her hands smelled of metal and storm. She thought of his eyes, the way they hadn't begged, hadn't pleaded. They had only told her the truth and left the choice in her hands. And she thought of the faces of her team, the same men who had once dragged her to safety through mud and fire. Could one of them have been the hand behind the betrayal? Could one of them have sold them out all those years ago? The silence pressed heavy. Her mother's voice returned in memory again. "Do you ever get tired?" She did, God, she did. But tired wasn't an option. Not now, not when the truth had finally cracked the surface. The next morning the report was filed, official, sterile. Target neutralized, mission complete, no survivors. Her signature rested at the bottom, cold ink on cold paper, a lie etched into history. But she carried the truth in her chest, hidden, heavy, dangerous. And as she stared at the report, she whispered words no one else could hear. "This isn't over." Because sometimes survival isn't about standing tall in the open. Sometimes survival is about carrying silence until the moment silence becomes a weapon. And Elira Vance, the guard with the cold, unmoving eyes, had just chosen her silence. For now, when does silence become betrayal? The compound looked the same in daylight. White walls, straight lines, soldiers moving with purpose, vehicles coming and going, dust rising under their wheels. To anyone else it was order, structure, a system that worked. To Elira it looked like a stage where every actor wore the same uniform, the same mask, the same silence, and she no longer trusted the script. She walked across the yard, boots crunching gravel, nods exchanged, salutes returned, nothing unusual, nothing suspicious. Yet her stomach twisted with every glance, every too long look, every whisper cut short when she passed. Someone had given the order. Someone had betrayed them in the snow. And if the man she let live was telling the truth, the traitor wasn't a ghost outside these walls. He was here, inside. She spent the morning buried in routine. Drills, reports, the rhythm of military life, precise and dull, a rhythm she had once found comfort in. Now every form she signed, every briefing she sat through, felt like a layer of camouflage covering something rotten beneath. At lunch, she sat alone. She always had, but today the solitude felt sharper. She caught fragments of conversation from the table nearby, two young recruits whispering about last night's mission. Said she was the one who pulled the trigger. No body though, that's weird. Maybe the storm carried it off. They laughed, nervous laughter thin and hollow. She kept her face still, but inside every muscle tightened. Word was already spreading, and once doubt began to spread, it never stopped. That night she returned to her quarters and locked the door. She pulled out the old letter, creased, frayed, the ink smudged in places where snowmelt had kissed it years ago. She read it again. "Elira, if you find this, it means I didn't die where you thought. It means I was taken, forced. Don't believe what they tell you, and if you can, forgive me." Her hands shook. She hated that they still shook after all these years. The storm outside the barracks had passed, but inside her chest it raged harder. A knock on the door broke her thoughts. 3 raps, soft, deliberate. She slid the letter into her jacket and opened the door just enough to see Corporal Dene, a kid barely 20, face pale, freckles dark against his skin. He shifted on his feet, eyes darting. "Captain," he whispered, "can I talk to you?" She scanned the hallway, empty. She stepped aside, he slipped in. The door shut. "What is it?" she asked. He swallowed. "I was on comms last night, monitoring perimeter chatter, and I heard something I wasn't supposed to." Her pulse spiked. "Say it." He hesitated, fear pressing on his face. "An override, on your channel, someone else feeding lines into HQ, telling them what you were seeing before you reported." Her blood went cold. Whose voice? I don't know. His hands twisted against each other. It was masked, but it came from inside, from this compound. The room seemed smaller, the air tighter. If what he said was true, then not only had someone betrayed them in the snow, they were still watching her, still steering her. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. His eyes met hers, wide, desperate. "Because I think they'll kill me if I don't, and because," his voice cracked, "because my brother died out there in that blizzard, and I can't just sit here and salute the people who sent him to it." Her chest ached. She wanted to reach out, but she didn't. He needed her to be strong, not soft. "You said nothing to anyone else." He shook his head. "Good, keep it that way." He nodded quickly, relief and fear mixing in his expression. Then he slipped out as quietly as he had come. She leaned back against the door, exhaling hard. Now she wasn't just carrying ghosts. She was carrying a secret that could kill her if it surfaced in the wrong ears. The next day she forced herself into routine again. Morning run, weapon checks, a meeting with command. The meeting room smelled of old coffee and ink. A half-dozen officers around the table, papers stacked neatly, voices droning about supply lines and training cycles. But she wasn't listening. She was watching every twitch, every flicker of an eye, every pause too long. Colonel Merrick sat at the head. His voice carried authority that felt worn, not earned. He had been there in the snow too. He had survived. Barely. He was one of the few who never spoke about it again. And when his eyes met hers across the table, something in her stomach turned. Not proof, not yet, but suspicion, sharp and bitter. That night she went to the archives, the place where old files went to be forgotten. She moved in silence, flashlight in hand, shelves towering around her like walls of secrets. Her fingers traced the spines of binders, folders marked with codes, dust thick on their surfaces. And then she found it. A report dated the night of the snow mission, the official version. She read lines of type, coordinates, orders. And then a signature. Colonel Merrick. Her throat closed. It was him, it had to be him. But before she could take the file, footsteps echoed down the hall. She snapped the folder shut, shoved it back into place, killed the flashlight. Darkness swallowed her. The footsteps grew closer, slow, deliberate, someone who wasn't lost, someone who knew she was there. She held her breath, every muscle tight, her hand wrapped around the knife at her side. The steps stopped just beyond her shelf. Silence. Then a whisper. "Captain Vance." The voice slid through the dark, calm, knowing. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "You're digging where you shouldn't," the voice continued. "Careful, curiosity can bury you faster than bullets." The footsteps turned, faded. She stood frozen for a long time after. When she finally slipped out of the archives, the night was colder than the snow in her memory. She had the truth now, or enough of it to know. But the truth wasn't safety. It was a death sentence. And as she walked back to her quarters, her hands clenched, her jaw set, she knew something with crystal clarity. The war wasn't out there anymore. It was here, inside. And this time, she couldn't trust anyone but herself. How do you fight an enemy that wears your uniform? The morning began like all the others. Bugle calls, boots pounding against dirt in drill formations, orders clipped and crisp. But beneath the rhythm, Elira felt the shift, a pressure, a subtle tightening, as if invisible fingers were closing around her throat. She walked through the yard, helmet under her arm, eyes forward. Soldiers nodded as she passed, but their eyes lingered, too long, too sharp. Someone had told them something. Not the whole truth, no, truth never traveled cleanly here, but enough to plant doubt, enough to stain her shadow. At breakfast she sat with her tray untouched, oatmeal cooling, bread untouched. She stirred her cup of coffee without drinking. Across the room Corporal Dene entered. His eyes found hers, and in that instant she knew he was scared. His steps faltered, and instead of sitting near her as he had before, he crossed to the far side, head down, silent. Something had reached him too. The first strike had already landed. By afternoon her orders came, a sudden assignment too sudden. Recon sweep along the eastern ridge. Routine, they said, nothing unusual. But she knew better. The ridge was empty. It had been for months. No chatter, no sightings. To send her there now was to place her in a space where anything could happen and no one would ask questions after. She prepped anyway, checked her rifle, her pack. Her hands moved with mechanical precision, but inside her chest burned. This was it, the moment she had trained for all her life, but never imagined would turn against her own. On the ridge, wind tore at her jacket, carrying the smell of pine and stone. Snow lingered in patches, hardened to ice. Her boots crunched with each step. She scanned the tree line, quiet, too quiet. And then she heard it, the faint static of a radio, not hers. She dropped to a knee, rifle raised, eyes sweeping. Nothing. Only shadows between trees, only the low growl of wind. The static grew, then a voice, faint, almost swallowed. She's alone. Her blood iced. She moved, low, fast, slipping between rocks and brush. Voices again, two this time, male, calm, calculated. Orders are clear. Make it look like an accident. Her breath caught, the words punched through her like shrapnel. This was no recon. This was her execution. She crouched low, heart pounding, fingers cold against the rifle's trigger. But then came hesitation, not fear of dying. No, she had lived too long with death's hand near her shoulder. The hesitation came from knowing what pulling the trigger meant now. If she fought back, she wasn't just killing soldiers. She was killing her own. Men who minutes ago had probably saluted her in the yard. Men who had families waiting for them. Men following orders, maybe blind to the truth. Her breath came slow, steady. She whispered to herself, survive first, answer later. The men drew closer, their outlines sharp against the pale ridge light. She could see the condensation of their breath in the cold. Their rifles lowered slightly, not because they weren't ready, but because they thought she was. That arrogance saved her. One step too close. She moved like lightning, pulling him down into the snow, her blade against his throat before he could gasp. His comrade spun, raising his weapon, but her shot cracked across the ridge before he could steady his aim. Silence crashed over the ridge again. The man beneath her shook, eyes wide, breath ragged. Young, too young. Orders, he choked. We were just following orders. She pressed harder, her blade at his skin. Whose orders? He swallowed, shook his head, terrified. Say it, she demanded, voice low, burning. His lips trembled, but no sound came, only fear. And in that silence she saw it clearly. Even if he spoke, even if he told her the name she already suspected, it would not matter. The machine was bigger than one colonel, bigger than one traitor. The rot was threaded into the bone of the system itself. Her blade wavered. Then she made her choice. She shoved him back hard into the snow. Run. He scrambled, hands clawing against ice, stumbling down the ridge until his figure vanished into the trees. Her chest heaved, her hands shook. She had killed before. She had buried men in storms, seen faces turn to ice. But this was different. This was not war. This was survival against her own. By nightfall she returned to base, calm on the surface, inside every nerve on fire. She handed in her rifle, logged her patrol. Nothing unusual, she said. The clerk didn't look up from his papers. But when she turned, she saw Colonel Merrick in the doorway, his face unreadable, his eyes like stone. Captain Vance, he said, voice smooth as oil. A word. She followed him into his office. The air was heavy with tobacco smoke, maps pinned on the walls, lines crisscrossing like veins. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey, Offered her one, she didn't take it. You've been restless, he said. Uneasy, asking questions, digging where there's nothing to find. She stood silent. He sipped, watched her over the rim of his glass. I need loyal officers, Captain, not shadows, not ghosts who think they can rewrite history. Her throat tightened. And what history is that? A small smile touched his lips. The kind that keeps this base running. The kind that doesn't collapse under the weight of old mistakes. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. Mistakes, is that what you call it? His smile didn't fade. He leaned closer. Be careful, Captain. Men die in storms all the time. Don't let yourself become one of them. The words hung heavy, poisonous. She left his office with her chest burning, her pulse shaking her veins. The line was clear now. There would be no justice from within. And yet, walking back to her quarters under the pale wash of moonlight, she felt something stir inside her, not just fear, not just rage. It was resolve. Because sometimes silence is survival, but other times silence is surrender. And Elira Vance had never been the surrendering kind. What do you do when the truth itself is a weapon? The base at night was a different world. Shadows swallowed the barracks, long corridors stretching into silence, boots echoing too loud against concrete floors. Most soldiers slept, chasing scraps of peace they rarely found. But Elira didn't sleep anymore. Sleep was dangerous. Sleep meant letting go, and she could no longer afford that. She moved with practiced quiet, steps measured, avoiding the cameras she knew were blind in certain corners, blind by design, because she had memorized their patterns years ago. She carried nothing that would rattle or shine. Only a small flashlight wrapped in tape, and the letter tucked against her chest like a second heartbeat. Her target was the comms room, the heart of the base, the place where orders became law, where transmissions were shaped and bent before reaching ears that trusted them. She slipped inside with a stolen keycard, the lock clicking soft as a sigh. The room hummed with machines, screens blinking in the dark, radio chatter faint but constant. Her hands worked fast. She knew she didn't have long before patrols circled back. She pulled the log sheets, ran her fingers down the lists of transmissions. Dates, times, frequencies. There the night of the ridge, the recon sweep. She traced the coordinates, not random, not meaningless. They led her directly into an ambush zone placed deliberately. Her stomach clenched. Proof. Not enough for a court, maybe not enough for the world, but enough for her, enough to burn away the last shadow of doubt. She copied what she could, jotted notes into her small black notebook, pages filled with hurried scrawl. Then she froze. Footsteps outside the door. She killed the light, pressing herself against the wall, breath locked in her chest. The door opened. A soldier entered, young, broad-shouldered, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He didn't see her at first. He sat at the console, yawning, flipping a switch. She raised the knife. One step and she could silence him. No one would know. But then he sighed, pulling a folded photo from his breast pocket. A woman, 2 children. He smiled faintly, rubbing his thumb over the image before tucking it back. Her hand shook. She lowered the blade. Not him, not this one. She waited until his eyes drooped, until his head sagged against the chair, sleep pulling him under. Then she slipped out, silent as smoke. Back in her quarters, she locked the door and pressed her notebook flat against the desk. Proof, coordinates, orders, enough to expose Merrick. But who could she give it to? The chain of command was poison, and outside the world would never believe without more than numbers on a page. Her eyes caught the letter again, her brother's words. Don't believe what they tell you. Her hand closed around the paper. She whispered to the empty room, I won't. The next day Merrick summoned her. His office smelled of stale smoke again, heavy curtains drawn against the sun. He studied her with that same cold patience, the patience of a man who knew he held the ground beneath her feet. You've been busy, he said, not a question, a blade disguised as a statement. She kept her face still, carrying out orders, sir. He leaned back, folding his hands across his chest. Good soldiers don't ask questions. They don't go wandering the archives. They don't prowl around comms rooms in the middle of the night. Her heart hammered, he knew. Somehow he knew. You're not like the others, Vance, he continued. You carry ghosts. They make you unpredictable, dangerous. Her voice came steady, colder than she felt. Maybe dangerous is what you need. A thin smile curved his lips. Careful, fire doesn't choose what it burns. When she left his office, she knew the game had changed. She wasn't just under suspicion. She was already condemned. That night she made her choice. No more waiting, no more silence. She found Corporal Dene in the supply hall, counting crates, his hands trembling more than usual. When he saw her, fear flickered in his eyes, but so did something else. Hope. I need you, she said quietly. His throat bobbed. They're watching me. They're watching us both. That's why we move now. He hesitated, then nodded. What do you want me to do? Together they mapped it out. A stolen vehicle, a route through the forest where patrols were thinnest, and the notebook their lifeline, their proof. But plans were fragile things. The night they moved, the base seemed to know. Alarms weren't sounding, no boots thundered behind them, but every shadow felt sharper, every silence heavier. They made it to the perimeter fence. Dene cut the wire with shaking hands. She kept watch, rifle steady, heart pounding. Almost there, he whispered. And then the searchlight swept across them. Shouts erupted, sirens, boots slamming against dirt. They ran through trees, across snow patches, breath burning in their lungs. Bullets cracked the air, splintering bark around them. Dene stumbled, cried out. She grabbed his arm, pulled him up, forcing him forward. Don't stop, she shouted. But the woods closed in. The lights followed. The machine had woken, and it would not rest until they were dragged back inside. At the crest of a hill, they collapsed behind rocks, gasping, sweat freezing against their skin. Dene's face was pale, blood seeping from his shoulder where a round had grazed him. He clutched the notebook tight, refusing to let it go. They'll never let us leave, he panted. Her hand pressed against the wound, her other gripping her rifle. Then we make them try. In that moment, as flares lit the sky red and white, she realized something. The base was no longer her prison. It was her battlefield. And she would fight it not as a loyal soldier, but as its enemy. Because survival was no longer the mission. Truth was, what does it mean to win when the cost is everything? The forest was no longer silent. It breathed with the roar of engines, the crack of branches beneath boots, the metallic shiver of rifles sweeping the dark. The machine had awakened fully, and its eyes were everywhere. Elira pressed Dene low against the frozen earth, her palm steadying the blood that seeped warm and slow from his shoulder. His breath came ragged, shallow, but his grip on the notebook never loosened. They're close, he whispered. I know. She heard them, voices cutting through the trees, the familiar rhythm of orders clipped and certain. She once marched to that rhythm. Now it hunted her. Her chest ached with a realization she couldn't shake. She wasn't running from an enemy. She was running from herself, from the oath she had sworn, from the idea that loyalty was strength, when in truth, blind loyalty was just another cage. She squeezed Dene's arm. You have to keep moving. He shook his head, pain etched deep in his young face. I'll slow you down. Then I'll slow down with you. A flare hissed into the sky, bursting red above the tree line. Shadows stretched long across the snow. They ran, stumbled, dragged each other through the undergrowth, branches tearing at their uniforms. The world became a blur of breath and blood and the thrum of their own heartbeats. At the edge of the forest, a valley opened wide, white with frost, moonlight silver on its surface. Beyond, the dark outline of the mountains. Freedom, perhaps, or another trap. But they had no choice. Halfway down the slope, the first shots cracked. Snow exploded at their feet. Danae cried out, falling hard to one knee. Elira dropped beside him, returning fire. Muzzle flashes sparked along the ridge. Too many. Go, Danae gasped. He pushed the notebook into her hands, fingers slick with blood. Take it. She stared at him, shaking her head. Not without you. You don't get it, he rasped. You're the one who can carry it, not me. They'll bury me before sunrise, but you, his voice broke. You can make them see. Her throat closed. For a moment she saw her brother's face in his, the same desperate fire, the same plea to be believed. More rounds split the night. She forced herself to decide. She grabbed Danae by the collar, yanking him up, half carrying, half dragging him down the slope. His cries tore through her chest like knives, but she didn't stop. Couldn't. At the valley floor, they collapsed behind a boulder, her rifle nearly empty, her lungs raw. Danae slumped against the stone, his hand trembling as it brushed hers. Promise me, he whispered. Promise you'll use it. Her eyes burned. I promise. His hand stilled, his eyes closed, and just like that he was gone. The silence after was worse than the gunfire. She pressed the notebook to her chest, her breath shaking, her soul hollow. Another ghost, another weight. The soldiers closed in, their shadows moving across the valley like a tide. She knew they would come for her next, and Merrick would be at the center, waiting, calm as ever. So she rose, slowly, deliberately, the notebook still in her hand, rifle slung across her back. When the first soldiers saw her, they hesitated. Guns raised, yes, but their eyes uncertain. She wasn't charging. She wasn't surrendering. She was just standing still as the snow. One of them called out, "Drop it." She didn't. Instead, she held the notebook higher, her voice carrying across the frozen ground. "This is the truth," she said. "This is what they're afraid of." The men shifted, glancing at one another. Doubt rippled through their formation like cracks in glass. Then Merrick's voice cut through the night, calm, commanding, poison wrapped in velvet. "Don't listen to her. She's broken. She's dangerous. She's nothing but a ghost clinging to lies." Her chest heaved. Her eyes met his across the distance. "You're wrong," she said. Her voice didn't shake. "I'm the one thing you can't bury." The standoff stretched. Soldiers frozen between two poles, loyalty and doubt, fear and conscience. Then Merrick raised his hand, a signal. Elira didn't wait. She turned, sprinting across the valley, snow kicking high behind her. Bullets snapped past, hot against her skin. She ducked low, weaving, running not for safety but for time. At the far side, she dropped into a shallow gully, breath tearing from her lungs. She pressed the notebook beneath her jacket, against her heart. If she died tonight, it wouldn't die with her. Somehow someone would find it, and maybe, just maybe, the truth would live longer than the lies. The night swallowed her, gunfire echoed, her steps faded into the dark. And when at last the valley fell silent again, only the snow remained, covering the ground in white, erasing footsteps, erasing blood. But not erasing memory. Because memory is not silence, memory is a voice. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.